Hello, welcome to HotSeat. I'm Martin Rogers here with Professor Simon Hix to discuss Britain's relationship with the EU and the upcoming referendum. Welcome, Simon.
Hi.
So first of all, how did we get to where we are now?
Well, in a sense, we've been a reluctant member of the European Union since the beginning. I mean, we voted 2/3 to 1/3 to remain a member of what was then the EEC back in 1975. But really, since the mid-80s onwards, most prime ministers have been angry or upset or annoyed about certain elements of the EU. And what has happened in recent years is most of the other countries in the European Union have moved towards deeper economic and political integration, and we've opted out of that. So we've opted out of the euro and all the new procedures that are put in place for governing the euro, and we've opted out of Schengen, the open borders agreement. And in those two areas, in a sense, we're on the outside. So increasingly we've looked like a sort of partial member of the EU. So inevitably, I think it was going to be sooner or later we were going to come to a point where a decision had to be made. Are we going to remain a member of a European Union to which we're not really a full member, or do we want to leave?
So why are we having a referendum, and what specifically is it on?
Well, I think we're having a referendum for several reasons. The first reason is there's been growing demand for a referendum that goes back to the Maastricht Treaty, where we didn't have a referendum on the Maastricht Treaty in the early 90s. We didn't have a referendum on any of the treaty reforms since then. And we saw the political class and the public and the media in Britain saw referendums in other countries around Europe. So we saw referendums in Ireland, in Denmark, in Sweden, in France, in the Netherlands. And we thought, why can't we have a referendum? And so Tony Blair promised a referendum on the constitutional treaty, which then didn't actually come to pass because the treaty was already defeated in referendums in France and the Netherlands. So Cameron came to power saying, I promise a referendum, and it won't just be a referendum on the treaties, it'll be an in-out referendum, which was a big gamble, but I think he made that gamble because he wanted to head off what was growing support for referendum in his own party and growing support amongst Conservative Party voters for the UK Independence Party.
So there's been talk about Cameron's renegotiation and the renegotiated position. What's your take on that?
Well, there's two different perspectives on that. One perspective is this is quite substantial. In a sense, what has happened, to put it in simple terms, is Cameron has negotiated a deal which really solidifies Britain as a sort of second-tier member of the EU, or Britain having a special relationship status within the EU. So the rest of the EU is still committed to ever closer union. We are not. The rest of the EU, or most of the rest of the EU, is committed to deeper integration within the Eurozone. He's managed to get some kind of deal that says that our interests are protected against what could be a spillover effects of that deeper integration. So in that, and he's managed to get a deal on preventing us or allowing us not to provide full benefits to migrants from other EU member states. So in that sense, this is sort of special status for Britain. But the referendum will not really be about that. I think the referendum will move on very quickly to bigger issues. Can we remain a sovereign state and be part of the European Union? Can we still be a leader in the European Union? Are our security and our political and our economic interests in the world best secured by being a member of the EU or by leaving the EU? And very quickly we're going to get to that kind of debate, and the real details of what he's managed to negotiate will become irrelevant.
And so what are the implications for us if we do stay?
Well, the implications if we do stay are, I think, there will still constantly be a question mark. I wouldn't be surprised if this is not the end of the story. So even if we vote by 60-40 to stay in, by that sort of big margin, there could be an argument that there's a big commitment for us to stay in, but it's a commitment to stay in the fact that we are a second-tier member of the EU. So we may, in a sense, the referendum's a bit early because we don't know what the EU is going to look like 10 years from now. Is there going to be a core Eurozone and states that are not in that Eurozone in the periphery? That's not the case right now. But if the EU is heading towards that, we may return to this question again in 5 or 10 years. The alternative is no, the EU carries on being largely a collection of 28 member states for governing the single market, and there really isn't deeper integration in that Eurozone. If that's the situation, I think Britain will carry on being more of a comfortable member of the EU.
And what would happen if we were to leave?
If we were to leave, I think it wouldn't be quite so much of a disaster as some of the pro-Remain campaigners maintain. I think the difference between us being inside on a second-tier status within the EU and us leaving the EU is actually much narrower than either the Remain or the Leave camp are claiming right now. Because if we stay on the second tier, we'll be part of the single market. We wouldn't be part necessarily of the full free movement of people. We wouldn't be part of the euro. If we left the EU, we will inevitably negotiate some kind of deal to get access to the single market. That will inevitably mean some kind of deal on the free movement of people. So protections for our citizens who live in the rest of the EU in return for EU citizens getting access to the British labour market. There will be some kind of deal about the application of some of EU laws and regulations in Britain for us to get access to the single market. So in a sense, it's more of a continuum. It's not a choice between full sovereignty, where we get to choose everything we want in a free and open world and we control our borders, we set our own rules for the market, or full paid up member of the Eurozone. That's not the choice. The choice is between being on the second tier in the EU or being outside the EU, but probably negotiating some kind of agreement with the EU. And for me, that difference isn't quite as big as I think some people are claiming.
And so what issues are likely to be the deciding factors in this referendum? Crucially, which groups of people are likely to make a difference to the final vote?
I think a big issue for a lot of people is going to be the political and economic risk. So there's a big uncertainty in any kind of referendum like this. There's a big, what we call a status quo bias, which is large groups of people who are uncertain, who don't know, who particularly who are economically vulnerable. Lower income groups in society, for example, they're economically vulnerable and they think, it's risky. If this is risky, what does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for employment? And they see things like, for example, the pound falling against the euro and against the dollar and think, oh my goodness, if we leave the EU, is it going to be more expensive to travel? Is it going to be more expensive to go to Spain or to go to Florida? Is it going to be, are goods going to be more expensive? Is my shopping basket going to be more expensive because goods at Tesco's and Sainsbury's are going to be more expensive because we import them from other countries, mostly from the rest of Europe? And so those kind of issues, I think, are going to be front and centre for a lot of the more vulnerable groups in society who are worrying or counting their pennies in their pocketbook.
Great. Thank you very much, Simon. You're off the hot seat.
Thanks.